Every day, an elderly woman sits on the same bench, staring at a house that was hers for over 60 years. What keeps her coming back, always tied to the past? A man, intrigued by the elderly woman's quiet routine, starts watching from a distance, trying to understand the reason behind her fixed gaze on the house. When he finally uncovers the truth, her story shakes him deeply. Days later, he meets with the owner of the house, but something happens that he could never have predicted. What does this house truly mean to her? And what could lead someone to make such an unexpected promise? Stay until the end, because what happens with this house will deeply surprise you and reveal the power that memories can have over our choices. Miguel dragged his feet along the sidewalk, feeling exhaustion weigh down on each step. His hunched shoulders told the story of decades spent in hard labor, carrying concrete blocks, cement, and dreams that were not his own. The sun had already set, and the cool evening breeze blew gently, but he hardly noticed. The path through the park, his usual shortcut, was a silent pause before facing the emptiness of the small apartment he called home. As he walked among the trees, something in the distance caught his attention. Sitting on a weathered wooden bench, an elderly woman stared fixedly at a house across the street. Her white hair framed a tired face, but it was her gaze, lost and fixed, that set her apart. It seemed as if she were trapped in a memory that wouldn't let her go. Miguel slowed his pace, feeling a knot form in his stomach. There was something unsettling about it, something he couldn't quite explain. He hesitated. He wasn't the type to interfere in others' lives, but the woman looked so alone, so distant, that instinct pushed him to do something. His feet changed direction almost without his noticing, and before he could think twice, he found himself standing next to her. "Good evening, ma'am," he said, his voice hoarse from the years. She didn't respond immediately. Her eyes remained glued to the house ahead. Miguel followed her gaze and saw the house. It was abandoned, with locked windows and a worn facade, a place that, like her, had seen better days. He frowned and tried again. "Are you all right, ma'am?" Only then did the woman blink, as if returning to reality. Without turning her head, she murmured, her voice trembling like the chilly wind passing by them. "It's all in there." A heavy silence fell between them before she added, "All of my life." Miguel didn't know what to say. That simple phrase hit him harder than any concrete block. He observed her profile for a moment, noting the deep wrinkles marking her skin and the way her eyes were fixed on the house as if they were a part of it. It was a gaze of someone who had lost everything yet still clung to what remained. He felt a tightness in his chest, recognizing that pain, the pain of living in one body while having the soul trapped in another place. The silence between them seemed to stretch into eternity, but Miguel, who had always been a man of few words, didn't want to leave. Something about the woman pulled him back, as if they shared an invisible bond, a mutual understanding that needed no words. He didn't know what that house meant to her, but he knew something significant was tied to it. "If you need help with anything, just let me know," he finally said, feeling it was the least he could offer. The woman merely nodded slightly, saying nothing more. Miguel took one last look at the house and then back at the woman. She didn't seem willing to talk any further at that moment, but he knew he would return the next day. Something would call him back, even if he didn't yet understand why. That night, as he lay in his narrow bed, Miguel couldn't sleep. The image of the woman sitting on the bench, with that distant gaze, wouldn't leave his mind. He wondered why it troubled him so much. Perhaps it was because, in some way, he too felt trapped in a place that no longer existed. Life hadn't been exactly kind to him, but unlike that lady, he had nothing to look back at, no place he could call his own. He tossed and turned, unable to find rest. What did that house mean to her? Why did she keep coming to the park to gaze at something that could no longer be hers? The answer seemed to slip through his fingers like fine sand, but Miguel knew that somehow That house held more than just empty walls, and he was determined to discover what it was. In the days that followed, Miguel found himself walking through the park more times than he would care to admit. Always at the same time, with the same excuse of shortening his way home, he crossed paths with the elderly lady. She was there, sitting on the same wooden bench, always staring intently at the house across the street. It didn't matter if it was raining or if the wind brought the chill of the coldest nights. Donna Celina never missed a day. Miguel couldn't quite understand what drew him to her. Perhaps it was the way she gazed at the house, as if she were tethered to something she couldn't let go of. Maybe it was how she reminded him of his own losses, of everything he had never managed to build for himself. There was something in the loneliness of that woman that mirrored his own life. One day, after hesitating for a long time, he decided to approach her again. This time, he wouldn't just ask if she was all right and move on. He needed to know more. So, without further ado, Miguel sat down on the bench beside her, his calloused hands resting on his thighs, unsure of how to begin. At first, the silence between them felt a bit awkward. Miguel stared ahead, just like she did, trying to find a way to break the ice. He noticed her gaze didn't waver. It was always fixed on that house. Something about it deeply unsettled him, but he didn't know if he had the right to ask. Still, something compelled him to continue. "That house, it seems very important to you," he remarked, almost as if he were talking to himself. Donna Celina didn't move right away, but her lips tightened slightly, as if she were weighing whether to respond. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she spoke. Her voice was soft, almost a whisper, but it carried the weight of decades of memories. "I lived there for over 60 years, she began, her voice trembling slightly. "My children grew up in that house. My husband died in my arms, in that room near the big window." Miguel felt a tightness in his chest upon hearing that. He knew she was carrying an immense burden. The way she spoke, with a resigned sadness, revealed that those memories were too alive to be left behind. He recognized that kind of pain. It wasn't a fleeting ache. It was a pain that settled deeply, and every detail brought back memories that never faded. "For you, it must be hard to come back here every day and see the house like this," he said, his voice lowered, trying to find the right words. "Why do you keep coming, if it only brings more pain?" Donna Celina finally shifted her gaze from the house and looked directly at Miguel for the first time. Her eyes were filled with something he couldn't fully define. Sadness, yes, but also something deeper. "Because even though I have nothing left, my memories are still there," she replied, with a simplicity that hit Miguel like a punch to the gut. He didn't know what to say at first. The raw truth of her words took him by surprise. He knew what it meant to lose things. He knew what it was like to work his whole life and never feel like he belonged anywhere. But Donna Celina, she had lost everything except for her memories, and even then, she clung to them as the only thing that kept her alive. For a moment he fell silent, looking down at the ground, trying to absorb what she had said. He wondered what he would do if he were in her place. If he had lived so long in one place, building a family, creating memories, and then had to abandon it all. Perhaps he wouldn't be able to move on either. "That's what hurts the most, isn't it?" Miguel said, still looking at the ground. "Knowing that everything we build can disappear." Donna Celina sighed deeply, as if her pains could be exhaled along with the air. "Yes, but it doesn't really disappear. The house is there, and everything I lived is still here," she said, pointing to her chest. "The walls may crumble, but the memory of them remains strong within me." Miguel nodded slowly, feeling a silent connection forming between them. For the first time in a long time, he felt understood, even without having shared anything about his own life. He didn't need to. The way Celina spoke, the way she looked at the house, everything spoke of a shared pain, a loneliness that didn't require explanation. "And your children?" Miguel asked, hoping that perhaps she had their support, even with everything she had lost. Donna Celina's eyes narrowed slightly, as if a new layer of sadness had settled in. They have their own lives now. They grew up, moved away, like everything else. Each one followed their path, and I stayed behind. I don't blame them, but when you devote your life to raising a family, you expect at least a part of them to stay with you." Miguel shook his head. He understood what she meant. Sometimes the most important things you build in life are also the easiest to lose. Time had a cruel way of taking away everything you valued most, and what remained were only memories, the invisible marks of what once was real. The two sat in silence for a few minutes, each immersed in their own thoughts. Miguel could feel the weight of Dona Celina's story on his shoulders, but at the same time he felt a growing urgency within himself. He wanted to help. He wanted to do something. But how? As he looked back at the house, he wondered what he could do to give her back even a part of what she had lost. Before we continue with this emotional story, remember to subscribe to the channel and leave your like. It's really important for the growth of the channel and helps us keep bringing stories like this. Comment below what you think so far. Let's get back to the story. Miguel had grown accustomed to his routine of meeting Dona Celina in the park. Their conversations, once brief and punctuated by silence, now flowed more naturally. Little by little he uncovered parts of her story, although he always sensed that much more was hidden behind her weary gaze. One afternoon, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange, Miguel sat down beside her, just as he usually did. This time, however, he noticed something was different. Dona Celina held a white handkerchief in her hands, gripping it tightly as if trying to prevent her emotions from escaping. Her eyes, usually fixed on the house across the street, now appeared more vacant, heavier. "Is something bothering you today, Dona Celina?" Miguel broke the silence, trying to reach out to the pain she seemed to carry. She sighed, the sound escaping like a breath that carried decades of weariness. "That house," she began, her voice nearly faltering. "I was forced to sell it, you know." Miguel frowned. It wasn't a surprise that she no longer lived there, but something about the way she said it made his heart race. He remained quiet, waiting for her to continue, as he often did when he sensed she had more to share. She adjusted the handkerchief on her lap, her fingers trembling slightly as she folded and unfolded it. "My husband died years ago. I was alone in that house. My children left, built their own lives, and I found myself trapped with bills I couldn't pay. I didn't want to ask them for anything. I never wanted to be a burden." Her eyes filled with tears that she quickly wiped away with the handkerchief. "So I sold the house. It was my only option." Miguel remained silent, feeling the weight of her words settle on his shoulders. He recognized that feeling, the bitter taste of sacrificing everything you have, only to find that nothing remains. Dona Celina had built her life in that house, raised her children, and now all she had were memories, and even that didn't seem enough to fill the void left by her loss. "And your children? Do they know what happened?" Miguel asked, his curiosity tinged with a hint of indignation. He couldn't understand how someone could leave their mother in such a difficult situation without offering help. Dona Celina shook her head slowly, avoiding Miguel's gaze. "They know, of course, but they have their own lives, their own problems. I didn't want to be a burden to them. I knew that if I asked for help, they would try to convince me to keep the house. But I didn't want to depend on anyone." Those words hit Miguel with an unexpected force. He saw in her the reflection of his own frustrations, a lifetime of sacrifice without recognition, the burden of being left behind, carrying everything alone. He wondered how many times over the years he had done the same, refusing to ask for help, bearing alone the weight the world placed on his shoulders. The price of that was a kind of loneliness he now recognized in Dona Celina. "And now, the house is for sale again," she said with a bitter laugh that sounded more like a sob. "But the price is too high. I could never buy it back." Miguel felt the blood pulse in his temples. It was almost cruel to see that house before her, so close yet completely out of reach. He looked at the abandoned house. The locked windows and overgrown garden mirrored what Donna Shalina felt inside. Everything crumbling, with no hope for restoration. "It must be hard to come here every day looking at what was once yours," he said, unable to hide the empathy in his voice. She nodded slightly, her eyes filled with tears she wouldn't shed. "I keep coming because this is the only place where my life still makes sense. My memories are there. They are all I have left." That phrase hung in the air, echoing inside Miguel. He felt the weight of her words in his own heart. He ran a hand through his hair, feeling the weariness of his own frustrations accumulate. He, who had spent his entire life building homes for others, had never created a place to call his own. And now, before that woman who had lost so much, he found himself unable to ignore the fact that his own life was a reflection of hers, a cycle of sacrifice without reward. That night Miguel lay in bed, but sleep didn't come. His thoughts raced in circles, always returning to Donna Shalina and her story. He couldn't stop thinking about the injustice of it all. A woman who had given everything for her family, raised her children, lost her husband, and now she was alone, with nothing but memories. To Miguel, the world seemed indifferent to those who sacrificed the most. He tossed and turned, restless. He thought of the countless houses he had built over the years, each becoming a home for other families. But he himself had never built anything for himself, and for the first time he wondered what that meant. What was he really leaving behind? Just walls, concrete, and bricks, or something more? Hours passed, and Miguel remained awake, feeling an urgency he had never experienced before. It wasn't about him. It was about Donna Shalina. He knew he had to do something. He couldn't give her back the house, but perhaps he could give her something more. Something that would make her feel she wasn't completely alone in the world. The next morning, Miguel rose with determination. He didn't yet know exactly what he would do, but one thing was certain. He wouldn't let Donna Shalina spend her final days trapped only in the memories of a past she could no longer touch. With the weight of this realization, Miguel found himself confronted with a decision. What could he do for Donna Shalina? And would he be able to change something in his own life that was also stuck in the past? Miguel had spent many sleepless nights, but this night felt different. Sleep seemed impossible amidst the restlessness that consumed him. Lying on his narrow bed, staring at the dark ceiling, he repeatedly replayed the conversation he had with Donna Shalina in the park. The image of the abandoned house, her vacant stare, her words heavy with sorrow. All of it spun in his mind like a wound he couldn't ignore. He knew he couldn't just continue his life as if nothing had changed. Something inside him had been awakened, something he couldn't dismiss. For the first time in years, Miguel felt he needed to do something beyond his job, beyond himself. It wasn't just a house, it was Donna Shalina's life, her story, her memories, and somehow he felt he could give her back a part of what she had lost. But how? The answer struck him suddenly, amidst the whirlwind of thoughts. He couldn't buy the house back for her. He didn't have that kind of money. But what he knew how to do was build, renovate, restore. He could give that house back the dignity it had lost, and with it, offer Donna Shalina a gift that no one else could, her memories, alive again. Miguel got out of bed, unable to wait any longer. It was 4 a.m, and the world was still asleep. But his mind was already in motion. He put on his work clothes as he did every day, but this time his routine would be different. He stepped out of his apartment and walked through the deserted streets, his decision etched firmly in his mind. He reached the front of Donna Shalina's house, as if he needed to see it one last time before taking the next step. The silence of the early morning made the house seem even darker. The windows were locked, the walls worn down by time, and the garden, long abandoned, looked dead. But Miguel didn't see decay. He saw potential. He saw the memories hidden beneath those layers of neglect, and he knew exactly what he had to do. The next day, bright and early, Miguel knocked on the door of the house's current owner. It was a middle-aged man who seemed more concerned with getting rid of the property than anything else. When Miguel explained his idea, the owner looked intrigued. "You want to renovate the house? For free?" The man frowned, unable to believe it. "Yes," Miguel replied firmly. "I want to do this, not for money, but to bring a bit of dignity back to this house. It's important to me and to someone else." The owner, surprised by Miguel's sincerity, pondered for a moment. "Look, I don't have much to lose. If you want to spend your time fixing up this old house, go ahead. Just don't expect me to cover the costs." "Don't worry about that," Miguel said. "I'll take care of everything." And with that, the decision was made. Knowing he couldn't renovate the house alone, Miguel reached out to an old friend who had been a generous builder for years, someone always willing to lend a hand, and after sharing the story of the elderly woman and the house that meant so much to her, the friend, moved by the situation and without hesitation, offered not only his labor, but also a significant amount of money, assuring Miguel that he wouldn't have to bear any costs, saying that some gestures like this one are done to restore dignity to those who need it most without expecting anything in return. Miguel wasted no time. He called some friends, all masons and construction workers, simple folks like him who understood the value of a heartfelt gesture. "I need help with a renovation, but it's not a typical job," he explained. "It's for someone special." Moved by Dona Chelina's story, Miguel's friends agreed to help. Within days, they began transforming the house. It was hard work. The roof needed repairs, the walls were deteriorated, and the garden was overrun with weeds. But for Miguel, every nail he hammered, every brick he laid, was not just part of a renovation. It was a way to breathe life back into something that had been lost. He imagined Dona Chelina seeing the restored house, touching the walls that had once housed a family. Day and night, Miguel dedicated himself to the project. Many times he worked until sunset and then continued under the glow of makeshift lanterns. His friends took turns, but Miguel was there every moment, tireless. "The house is coming back to life, just like its memories," he thought, visualizing Dona Chelina's smile upon seeing the final result. But there was an important detail. From the beginning, Miguel asked Dona Chelina not to visit the house until the renovation was complete. He wanted it to be a surprise. He knew that if she saw the unfinished process, it might be too painful, bringing up fragmented and incomplete memories. So in all their conversations in the park, he convinced her that waiting was best. "Trust me," he told her one afternoon. "When it's ready, you'll see. I don't want you to see the middle, only the end." Dona Chelina, with a sad smile, agreed. "It's hard not to peek," she admitted, her eyes wandering towards the house as they always did. "But I trust you, Miguel." Weeks passed quickly. Miguel didn't care about time or fatigue. He knew he was doing something bigger than himself. The renovation progressed, and little by little, the house regained its new form. The roof, which had once threatened to collapse, was restored with new tiles. The windows received new frames and paint, and the garden, once a tangle of weeds, was cleaned and replanted with flowers that Miguel imagined had been Dona Chelina's favorites. Every detail was crafted to recreate what had once been her home. Miguel wanted her, upon entering, to feel like she was returning to the past, but without the pain of loss. He wanted her to see the house as it should have always been, a place of love, of life. Finally, after weeks of hard work, the house was ready. Miguel stood in front of the gate, observing what they had achieved. The house, once abandoned and deteriorated, now seemed reborn. It was a sight that filled his chest with pride, but also with a certain anxiety. He didn't know how Dona Chelina would react. Would she accept the gift? Would seeing the renovated house bring her peace, or more sadness? He knew the next step was crucial. He needed to show her what he had done, but he feared the impact might be too great. Would the memories be too painful for her to handle? And if, instead of bringing joy, the restored house brought only more longing? In that moment, As he looked at the finished work, Miguel wondered if he had made the right decision. There was no way to know until Donna Celina saw the result. Now, he needed to find a way to bring her back to the house. But how could he do that without hurting her even more? Miguel was restless. The weeks of hard work had come to an end, but he couldn't feel any relief. The house was ready, impeccable, every detail carefully restored so that Donna Celina would see it as if time had never passed. Yet, anxiety gnawed at him from within. What if she didn't react the way he hoped? What if instead of bringing peace, the house brought pain? He took one last look at the finished work. The roof had been completely replaced, the windows were now perfectly aligned, with white curtains gently swaying in the breeze, and the garden, once overrun with weeds, now flourished with vibrant colors. To anyone passing by, the house looked ready for a new story. But for Celina, Miguel knew the impact would be much greater. The time had come. He picked up the phone and called Donna Celina, the nervousness evident in his voice. "Donna Celina, I'd like to invite you for a walk. I think it's time for you to see what I've been doing." There was silence on the other end of the line, followed by a sigh. "All right, Miguel, I trust you." Miguel and Donna Celina walked side by side in silence through the park she had always frequented. The sun was beginning to set, and the golden light reflected off the trees, creating a calm yet tense atmosphere. Miguel knew that at any moment, the silence would be broken in an irreversible way. He stole glances at Celina, her aged hands gripping the cane firmly, her eyes focused ahead, as if she knew where they were going but was still reluctant to admit it. When they reached the corner where the house was visible, Miguel stopped. He knew Donna Celina would need a moment before facing what lay ahead. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice softer than he expected. She paused, taking a deep breath before responding. "Ready? I don't know, Miguel. But I'm here." They took the final steps toward the house. When Donna Celina raised her eyes and saw the facade, she froze. Her eyes filled with tears almost instantly, and her mouth opened in a whisper that was nearly inaudible. This can't be." Her voice broke, and her hands began to tremble. Miguel remained by her side, closely observing each reaction. She lifted a trembling hand, as if trying to reach for the house, but the distance between them was still great. "I can't believe it," Celina murmured, her eyes fixated on the door. "It's as if nothing has changed. Everything is just as it was." Miguel took a step forward, encouraging her to do the same. "Let's go inside, Donna Celina. I want you to see it from the inside." She hesitated for a moment, as if needing one more second to process what her eyes were seeing. Then slowly, she began to walk toward the entrance, Miguel by her side, offering support if she needed it. They crossed the gate and reached the front door. Miguel opened it and they stepped inside. The interior of the house was perfect. Miguel had paid attention to every detail that Donna Celina had mentioned over the weeks. The walls, painted in the same soft hue that once adorned the place, the windows with lace curtains she had chosen when her children were little, and the smell of freshly polished wood that seemed to bring back the warmth of a distant time. Donna Celina ran her hand along the wall as she entered, feeling the texture of the paint. Her eyes roamed the room, trying to absorb every piece of history that Miguel had restored. "It's as if I've traveled back in time," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "Miguel, you brought it all back!" She walked slowly through the living room, her eyes shining with tears that threatened to fall at any moment. She passed down the hallway, touching every surface, as if she wanted to make sure everything was real. Upon reaching the bedroom that had once been hers, she stopped. Miguel, who had been following closely behind, felt the air grow heavier. He knew what that room represented. He knew that there lay the heart of Donna Celina's most painful memories. She opened the door carefully, as if fearing what she would find on the other side. Upon entering, her eyes immediately fixed on the large window. the same one from which she had watched life pass by countless times alongside her husband. "This is where he died," she said almost in a whisper. "In my arms, right here." Miguel stood still at the door, unable to move. He felt the knot in his throat tighten as Selena advanced toward the bed. She knelt on the floor, her fingers gliding over the wooden surface, the same places where, long ago, her knees had touched when she said goodbye to her husband for the last time. "He's here," she said, her voice trembling but filled with an unwavering certainty. "I feel like he's here, Miguel." And then, the tears she had held back for so long began to fall, uncontrollable. She dropped to her knees, sobbing in a way that seemed to come from deep within her soul, as if all the suffering she had carried for decades was being released at once. Miguel watched the scene, his own vision blurring. He knew he had not just restored a house. He had brought back a part of Dona Selena's life, a part she thought was lost forever. But as he saw her so vulnerable, Miguel wondered if he had done the right thing. Her pain, mixed with the joy of revisiting her memories, was overwhelming. He slowly approached, kneeling beside Dona Selena, but without saying a word. He simply placed his hand on her shoulder, offering the only thing he could in that moment, his presence. They remained there, the two of them, in silence, for a long time. Selena, kneeling on the floor, and Miguel beside her, feeling the weight of every memory now filling that place. He didn't know if that house would bring peace, or if it would only reopen old wounds, but he knew in that moment that he had done something significant, something that would change both her life and his. Now that Selena had revisited the past and faced her memories, what does this mean for her future? And how will Miguel deal with the emotional consequences of his decision? If you're enjoying the journey so far, don't forget to subscribe, leave a like, and hit the notification bell to follow the upcoming videos. It really helps the channel grow. Now let's continue with the story. Time seemed to stand still within that house. The sun, which had once bathed the room in a soft light, had set, plunging the space into a tranquil twilight. The only illumination came from the dim lamps Miguel had installed days earlier, but the light was enough to create a warm, almost intimate atmosphere. Dona Celina sat on the floor of the bedroom, her back against the wall, her eyes swollen from crying, yet wearing a serene expression that Miguel had never seen on her before. He sat a little farther away, unsure whether to speak or simply let silence do what words could not. There was a strong connection in that silence, something that transcended what either of them could explain. They were no longer two strangers who had crossed paths by chance. They had become two lives intertwined in a unique way. Dona Celina, still taking deep breaths as if trying to compose herself after an emotional storm, slowly turned her gaze toward Miguel. The smile on her face was small and contained, yet it carried a peace that he knew she hadn't felt in a long time. "You have no idea what you've done for me, Miguel," she said, her voice still hoarse from the sobs she had controlled. "I can never repay you for this." Miguel, always a man of few words, shook his head, trying to find a way to respond. But nothing felt right. Nothing seemed worthy of the moment they were sharing. He knew he hadn't done what he did for any kind of reward, least of all monetary. All he wanted was to see that smile on Dona Celina's face, to see that she had rediscovered a part of her history she thought was lost forever. "You don't need to," he finally responded, his voice low but firm. "Seeing you smile like this is all I need." Silence fell between them again, but this time it was different. It was a comfortable silence that seemed to fill the space between what had been said and what still didn't need to be spoken. Dona Celina looked around once more as if memorizing every detail, every corner of the house that now sparkled with new life. Her trembling hands caressed the wooden floor, and she sighed, releasing a mix of relief and nostalgia. "This house," she began, her voice weak yet determined, "even if I can't have it back, it will always be here, within me, thanks to you." Miguel felt a tightness in his chest upon hearing that. He understood what it meant. He knew that despite all the effort, all the hard work to restore every detail, the house would never truly belong to her in a practical sense. But somehow it had become even more important. Now, it lived within Donna Celina as a living memory, something she could carry with her wherever she went. Miguel remained silent, observing her. In that moment, something profound happened between them. There was no longer a need for words, for explanations. An invisible bond connected them, a bond forged by shared pain, restored hope, and generosity flowing without the expectation of return. It was as if, in that instant, they had found a mutual understanding that transcended any conversation. They didn't need to talk about the past or the future. The present, that moment inside the house, was enough. Hours passed without them noticing. Miguel stood up, walked to the kitchen, and returned with 2 mugs of hot tea. It was a simple gesture, but filled with meaning. He handed one to Donna Celina, who accepted it with a faint smile of gratitude. They sat there on the bedroom floor, sipping tea in silence like old friends who didn't need grand gestures to demonstrate affection. "I won't forget this, Miguel," she suddenly said, breaking the gentle silence that enveloped them. "I thought I had lost everything. When I sold this house, I believed I was selling the last part of my life that still belonged to me. But you've returned something to me that I didn't even know I still had." Miguel looked at her, feeling the weight of her words. He had always known the house meant a lot, but now he understood it was more than just a structure. It was a symbol of everything Donna Celina had lost, and in a way, everything she still held on to. "I didn't do much," he said, almost embarrassed. "I just fixed what was broken." Donna Celina laughed softly, but there was a hint of sadness in her laughter. "Miguel, you didn't just fix a house. You fixed a part of me." She turned her head to look out the window, the same one that overlooked the garden where her children played, where her husband tended to the plants that once flourished. "I needed to come back here. I didn't know I needed to, but now I know." Miguel, unsure of what to say, simply nodded. There was truth in her words that he couldn't contest. There was something about helping someone find peace that he had never experienced before. At the same time, he felt that he was gaining something too. Donna Celina, with all her fragility and strength, had touched a part of him he had never allowed anyone to see, the part that desperately wanted to connect. As the night wore on and fatigue began to weigh on them, Miguel helped Donna Celina to her feet. They walked slowly to the front door. Outside, darkness had already enveloped the world, but inside the house, everything seemed illuminated by a new energy. Before leaving, Donna Celina took one last look at every corner, every detail. "I'll be back tomorrow," she said firmly. "I want to spend more time here." Miguel smiled, relieved. "The house will always be here for you, Donna Celina." She nodded, but before stepping out, she held his hand for a moment. "Thank you, Miguel. I will never forget this." They exited the house, and Miguel closed the door behind them. As they walked back through the park, side by side, Miguel felt that something had changed. They were no longer 2 strangers crossing paths in a plaza. Now they were connected in a way that transcended time and space, and he knew that this bond, this soul tie, was forever. The house brought the peace that Donna Celina had been desperately seeking, but what would come next? Could the connection between her and Miguel continue to grow? Or could the revived memories bring new surprises for their future? A few days had passed since Miguel and Donna Celina experienced that moment of deep connection in the restored house. Miguel continued with his routine, but now he felt a different lightness in his chest. Each morning, the walk to work felt less burdensome. The world around him hadn't changed, but something inside him had. The gesture he made for Donna Celina, although simple, had transformed him in a way he couldn't quite explain. It was during an ordinary morning, while he was in the middle of a construction project, that Miguel's phone rang. He looked at the unfamiliar number on the screen with a hint of suspicion, but answered anyway. "Miguel, it's the owner of the house. We need to talk," said the voice on the other end straightforwardly. Immediately, Miguel's heart raced. Something about the man's tone made him think of the worst. Perhaps he regretted letting Miguel renovate the house for free. Maybe he wanted to change something. He didn't know for sure, but he hung up the phone, promising to meet him after work. That day at work dragged on. Sweat dripped from his forehead as he tried to focus on each hammer strike, on every block he placed, but his mind was on the house. What did the owner want? The thought of losing everything he had done for Donna Selena troubled him more than he wanted to admit. What if he wanted to sell the house for an exorbitant price? What if he wanted to undo the renovation? When his shift finally ended, Miguel rushed to the meeting place. Upon arriving, he was greeted by the owner, a middle-aged man with a serious demeanor. But there was something in his eyes that seemed different, perhaps a hint of kindness that hadn't been there before. "Miguel, come in, have a seat," the man said, gesturing to a chair. Miguel sat down, feeling a bit uncomfortable. Silence stretched for a few seconds before the owner began to speak. "I saw what you did with the house, the work you and your friends put into it, all the dedication. I confess at first I thought it was madness. Why would someone renovate a house that isn't theirs? But now I understand. I passed by the other day and saw the house with new eyes, and it's alive again." He paused, looking at Miguel in a way that made his stomach churn. "You did something extraordinary, and it moved me." Miguel remained silent, unsure of how to react. He hadn't expected any kind of acknowledgement, let alone the personal tone the man was using. "I'll get straight to the point," the owner continued. "I know how much this house means to Donna Selena, and I also realize that even after all the work you've done, she would never be able to afford to buy it back. So here's my proposal. I'm willing to sell the house for a fraction of its market value. I want her to have a chance to get it back." For a moment Miguel was paralyzed. The owner's words hung in the air, but they felt impossible to process. He could hardly believe what he was hearing. You're serious?" he asked, his voice louder than he intended. The man nodded firmly. "I'm serious. I know this is an unusual decision, but after seeing what you did for that woman, I realized it's not just a house. It's part of her life, her memories. And now, it's back." Miguel felt a rush of euphoria surge within him, something he hadn't experienced in a long time. The opportunity to return the house to Donna Selena, not just as a restored place but as her home, was something he had never thought possible. He thanked the man with all the words he could muster, promising to return with Donna Selena as soon as possible. Miguel ran through the park, his heart pounding in his chest, hardly believing what had just happened. He needed to tell Donna Selena as quickly as possible. He needed to see her face when he delivered the news. When he arrived at their usual bench, he found her sitting there, as always. Her gaze was lost in the direction of the house, as if she were still absorbing everything that had happened over the past few weeks. Miguel, out of breath, stopped in front of her, a huge smile on his face. "Donna Selena, I have incredible news," he began, trying to control his excitement. "The owner of the house, he's willing to sell it to you for a fraction of the price. You can buy it back." He expected Donna Selena to react with surprise, joy, perhaps with tears of gratitude. But to his surprise, the smile he hoped to see didn't appear. Instead, she looked at him with a calm, almost resigned expression and sighed deeply. "Miguel," she began, her voice soft but weary, "I truly appreciate it. I really do. But I can't accept. I don't have much time left. My body, it's tired." Miguel frowned, not understanding. "But Donna Selena, this is the opportunity we've been waiting for. The house can be yours again." She smiled, but it was a sad smile filled with understanding. "I know, Miguel. I know how much this means, and I know how dedicated you've been to giving me back this piece of my life. But my body is tired. I feel it every day. And now, more than ever, I know I can't go back." Miguel fell silent, processing her words. He had clung to the idea of returning the house to her as the solution to everything, as a way to make her happy. But now, faced with the reality of Donna Celina's deteriorating health, he realized that perhaps he had been projecting his own desires and needs onto her. "Knowing that you care about me, that's already more than I could ask for," she said, gently taking his hand. "The house, the memories, I already have them here, inside me, and that is enough." Miguel felt the weight of her words. There was a serenity in Donna Celina's voice that he could not ignore. She had made peace with the past, and maybe it was he who was still trying to cling to something that could not be fully reclaimed. "I just wanted to do something for you," he said, his voice a bit shaky. She squeezed his hand. "You already have, Miguel. You already have." Now that Donna Celina had turned down the opportunity to buy the house, what does this mean for her future and Miguel's? And what will be Miguel's next step after dedicating so much to this mission? The day began like any other for Miguel. He woke up early, feeling physically tired, but with a slightly lighter mind after the conversation he had with Donna Celina the day before. As he drank his simple coffee and put on his work boots, his thoughts were still filled with her words. "I no longer have time." That thought troubled him, but he believed they had come to a conclusion. Donna Celina had found peace, even without her house back. He felt he had done what he could. As he walked toward the construction site, his phone rang. Miguel, on autopilot, ignored the first call, thinking it was work-related. But the phone rang again. With a sigh, he answered. The voice on the other end was soft yet serious. "Miguel, this is from the hospital. We regret to inform you that Donna Celina passed away during the night. She left us peacefully in her sleep." Miguel stopped in the middle of the street, the words echoing in his mind like a distant chime. The impact of the news hit him hard. He tried to say something, but the words wouldn't come. It was as if the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. "Donna Celina," he whispered, incredulous, as his mind struggled to process what he had heard. The voice on the phone continued, but Miguel could barely hear. Something about arrangements for the funeral, about how she didn't suffer. Those words seemed irrelevant. What mattered was that she was gone, silently, without fanfare, without goodbyes. The funeral was simple, just as Donna Celina would have wanted. Few people attended, mostly neighbors who had known her for years since her children were small. Miguel stood there at a distance, watching the coffin being lowered into the ground. He was still in shock, the reality of the loss beginning to weigh heavily. Knowing that she had passed peacefully didn't offer the comfort he had hoped for. The feeling that something remained unfinished suffocated him. When the ceremony concluded, a man in a dark suit, whom Miguel had never seen before, approached him. He carried a serious yet determined air, as if he knew exactly what to do. "You are Miguel, right?" the man asked. Miguel nodded, still trying to process everything that had happened. "I'm Donna Celina's lawyer. She instructed me to deliver this to you." The man pulled an envelope from his suit pocket and extended it to Miguel. "She asked that I deliver it personally, after the funeral." Miguel took the envelope, feeling its weight in his hands, as if he were holding something of utmost importance. He noticed the name Miguel written in Donna Celina's familiar handwriting. Unsure of what to expect, he thanked the lawyer with a simple nod and stepped aside to open the envelope. Inside was a letter. The delicate handwriting echoed Donna Celina's voice as Miguel began to read, feeling his heart tighten with each line. "Miguel, my dear friend, if you are reading this, it means my time has finally come, as I always knew it would. Do not be sad. My life has been long, filled with moments I will cherish until the end. And thanks to you, my last days were happier than I could ever have imagined. You restored more than just a house. You brought back my memories, my story, and I will be eternally grateful for that. But I also know that even with the restoration, you felt that something was still missing. I know how much you wanted to return this house to me, how hard you worked for me, and that's why I want to share a surprise with you. A few weeks ago, before our last conversation in the park, I met with the owner of the house. I learned that he had decided to sell it at an accessible price after seeing all you had done. I knew you weren't aware of this, but I used all the savings I had kept over the years to buy the house back. It was the last surprise I wanted to give you, a way to thank you for everything. Yes, Miguel, the house is mine again, but more than that, it is yours. I leave this house to you. My greatest wish was for you to find, just as I did, a place to call home. You restored my story, and now I want this house to be yours. Not as a responsibility, but as a gift. I know how much you need a place to always return to, where you can find peace. You did this for me, and now it's your turn to find your peace. With all my love, Selena. Miguel felt tears streaming down his face before he could stop them. He clutched the letter tightly, his hands trembling. The house. It was his. Selena had bought it back without him knowing, using everything she had saved. Even in her own fragility, she thought of Miguel, and in that final gesture gave him what he never expected to receive, a home. He couldn't help but let out a sob. The pain of losing Selena was still there, as deep and painful as before, but now mixed with something more. Gratitude. She had thought of him until her last moment. She knew him in a way that no one else did. She understood that behind his simple, hard-working facade was someone who needed a home, a place where he could finally belong. Days later, Miguel returned to the house. The same house he had restored with such care now carried an even greater meaning. It was no longer just the place Dona Celina called home. Now it was his too. He opened the door slowly, breathing in the fresh air of the interior, the sound of his boots echoing on the wooden floor he had restored. Everything looked the same, yet everything felt different. Dona Celina's presence lingered in every corner, in every detail. He could feel her, as if she had never truly left. Miguel walked into the room where Celina had cried, touching the walls and the windows. He sat in the chair by the window, the same one she had used so many times to look outside at the garden where her family once lived. Now the garden was thriving again, and Miguel knew that, in a way, this house would always carry the essence of Dona Celina. But more than that, it now carried something of him as well. It was his home, a home he never thought he would have, something he never believed he deserved. He sighed, allowing peace to finally settle in his heart. Dona Celina had left behind much more than a house. She had left a legacy of love, friendship, and generosity. And in that moment, Miguel knew that no matter what happened, he would always have a place to return to. Sometimes the greatest gifts are not material but emotional. Miguel finally found his home, not just in bricks and mortar, but in the memories and the human connection he built with Dona Celina. Her legacy lived on in the house, but above all, it lived in Miguel's heart, who had finally found his peace. This story reminds us that sometimes it's not what we've lost that defines who we are, but what we do to preserve what truly matters. The man who entered this woman's life brought more than just a renovation. He restored her memories and her dignity, creating an unbreakable bond. In the end, he discovered that a true home is not just a physical place, but a feeling of belonging. How often do we look to the past, not realizing that the present offers us a chance to rebuild what we thought was lost? Now think, what would you do for someone who means the world to you? If you enjoyed this emotional story, subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next videos. Give it a like if this story touched you, and share it with someone who needs this message. Don't forget to click on the card to watch the next recommended video, another story just as moving as this one. Thank you for watching.